everyone. Welcome back to the world of Evindale. As usual, I always forget to turn my mic back on after I do the intro. This particular series is about the countries of Evindale, and tonight we're going to explore one of the darkest mysteries of Evindale that in about the 37 years or so, actually I think it's about 38 years now, I don't even know, that the world of Evindale has been around. The empire of the Slindari have never really been fully described. Well, tonight we're going to change that. Ages ago, the Slindari elves existed in the various parts of the world that are today known as the Spine, a long range of mountains that exist to the eastern portion of the continent of Evindale. However, they weren't always, towards the end of their age, when they first came about, they were only allowed to be in that area for several thousand years before interlopers or outsiders, known as the Kitakal, had come in. The Slindari then abandoned their former home and then sought to make another one. This is their story, and the Kitakal today, in their language, are known as interlopers or outsiders or intruders. We know them as the dwarves. But the Slindari themselves isolated themselves from the rest of the world in a dark, forested, wooded land that to this day remains pretty much pristine. Well, let's get right into it. This is the map of the world of Evindale, and the way up there in the corner, this area right there, this is their new kingdom, the Empire of the Slindari. Taking a further look at it, what we see here is a forested continent, essentially an island continent that is quite massive. I don't know if you can see it, but there are small hexes on here. Each of these hexes equal 40 miles. The only thing that is truly known about this continent, aside from that the Slindari do live there, is that it is a democratic government. They seem to elect all of their administrators, they elect all of their leaders, but the exact terms of all of that is really, no one truly knows. Well, tonight we're going to get into all of that, but we're also going to get into what the Slindari Kingdom is really known for as far as the outside world goes. Situated in between the countries of Nudfriu and Kultrek, Mutfia to the west, and the island city-state of Amstrad to the west, the continent island of Slindari is really known for one thing to these people on the outside. Each of these villages here, such as Skierholti, Grel Tixley, Klin, Kedal Tiril, Slantal, Serenkor, and in the Evindale name, or the language of Kultrek, Redtown. Others dot the perimeter of this nation, including all the way up to the top, Daxgil, the Tir. All of these are slave towns. The interesting thing about slavery in Slindari is that they are not into slavery in and amongst themselves, but anybody that gets caught by them is turned into a slave, for each of these are slave towns. Not much else is known about the government or the cities or the towns of the Slindari. No one really knows where they live aside from the Slindari themselves. The outsiders have all met Slindari. They have met each and every single one who has been in any of these slave towns, happily trading any interlopers that would dare to come in. According to Slindari government, anybody who steps foot on Slindari land without direct permission of the inhabitants immediately foregoes any nationality and instead becomes property of Slindari. They are vicious. They are merciless. They have no issues whatsoever in keeping their secrets safe. But what is it exactly that they're hiding? Perhaps those answers can be known within the capital of Syrinx. First, let's get into the government. You will notice on this map, there are a couple of places here. This one, for example, known as Falax Dilix Dak. Coming over here to the west, Haliak Skorfel. Over here to the east, Drazarak Si Ren. And coming down here, Exavar Skorthan. These are the four major districts of the Slindari Empire. The individual names, Exavar is, and etc., and all those others, those are the individual names of the actual districts, but Skor and Than are actually names of the areas in which they are in geographically speaking. Skor, in this case, means a forested district. Rexil means a hilly district, and Dilax means a mountainous district. Dak, in this case, here you see Exavar Skor Thon. Thon, in this case, means south. Dak to the north, Rin to the east, and Fel to the west. This style of naming all of their towns, all of these names here, and I'll get into the underlying language in a moment, each of these all have an individual meaning, and they are a very direct people. They while their poetry is fairly well known, at least to the slaves within these areas, and it can be rather beautiful and seemingly ancient in its form. Alliteratives, not many rhymes, feminine endings coupled with 15 syllabic pairs. It's really incredible poetry that they can convey, but in every other or that they have as an art form. But in their own dealings, they are very, very direct, and therefore each of these are simply the names of the swamps or the rivers that they happen to be on, coupled with a geographical reference or a cardinal compass point, and that's pretty much it. Sedix itself, however, means victory, as if to have this area here is their home, that this is something that they have earned. And so if you ever meet a Slindar by the name of Serix, or its derivatives such as Seren or what have you, you're going to meet a typical name in Slin, the dialect of ancient Elven, that someone would be proud to have. And even their names have these underlying very direct meanings. Of course, many cultures across the world do have such things, but nonetheless, they are certainly no exception. You'll notice here that, whoops, remove the wrong one. You will notice here that there's an item on the map known as gold oak. Well, Lytix kills Rit and still Yilix. This is an area of contention here. Gold oak, along with the oaks that surround all of Syrinx itself, is a massive golden oak, hence its name. However, it's a little bit more than that. This is also the land of Ents. This is where the tree folk live, and the Slin use them to their advantage. Kills Zrit. Well, Zrit actually means magic user or wizard. Kill does mean kill. That name, all of these towns here, each means something. I keep moving the wrong graphic. Each of these means something absolutely horrific and stand as warnings to the city-state of Amstrad to its west, a city-state that is known for its investigations and teachings, for its knowledge hoarding of magics, both ancient and not. Amstrad, while extremely powerful in the magical world, cannot even compare to the knowledge that the Slindari kingdom has, and constantly try to invade from their west to these shores. Kilzrit is the name of a slave town that means kill wizards. Just as a polite reminder to Amstrad, stay the hell away. Lyrics, kill Darax. Well, Darax in their own tongue means fighter. In this case, kill warriors. You will find other such places, but it is the gold oak that those of Amstrad perhaps fear the most. It is the most ancient of Ents that have existed anywhere in all of Evindale, and the Slin and it supposedly have a treaty of some sort. Apparently, the Slin have used the Ents, or perhaps the Ents have used the Slin. There is an agreement amongst these people. The Ents are not trees. The Ents are beings that happen to look like trees, but they are far more ancient than even trees themselves. It is believed that when trees were first created, or at least the concept of trees, or the possibility of trees by Sithlia, it was the Ents that were first created. Certainly there was moss and other things like that, other plant life around. However, it was these mighty things that arose when Sithlia touched the first of the plants, and from it sprung forth a mighty Ent. And along with the Slindari, the Ents themselves exited the mainlands beyond and came into the continent of Slindari along with the Slin. What exactly that the nature of the treaty is, well, no one knows. Well, I can tell you that There's a reason why in many of the adventures that I have held, the campaigns, the tabletop campaigns, that people really haven't come across Ents. There were a couple in Mutfia, such as one that stepped out in the middle of a road in order to slam a oh no, actually that was a druid who turned into an Ents. Never mind. Even then, the Ents don't really exist too much outside of the Slindari kingdom, where they are used as protectors. However, some druids, particularly those in Amstrad or in Kultrek off to the east, and particularly those of Southern Kultrek, or the tribal nation of Southern Kultrek, the druids there have had some communication with the Ents, and it seems like the Ents are actually the ones in control, at least according to the Ents themselves. But nonetheless, the gold oak stands as a persistent reminder that there is more than just the Slin that live here. There are creatures. I suppose in a high fantasy type of world, to say that there are dinosaurs out there is kind of typical. But these aren't just dinosaurs. These are the primordial beings. And this leads me on to another potential inhabitant, the dragon themselves. In one of the other videos of Dra Anan, it was said that in northern Dra Anan, the last of the dragon, one by the name of Alraxis, a primordial dragon, those creatures that Sithlia had summoned or had brought forth in order to assist in shaping the world with their massive talons and massive wings, being able to flood nations or flood lands or cause great depressions to cause that flooding, allowing wrinkles in the earth, fold mountains or what have you, plateau mountains. Well, plateau mountains you'll see here in a second, but fold mountains and more, as the dragon would push on the ground and cause these mighty buckles to occur, to create mountains. Well, the Slindari kingdom is certainly one of those that may have had exactly that. A lot of the land formations within this, random hills or mountains or what have you, or depressions, all seem to have been created by some sort of a mighty force in the past. And the land itself really hasn't changed. There is what some believe to be dormant volcanoes, but to our knowledge, it's really only down here to the southwest do we have any such thing in Mount Vedesh and Mutfia. There's been no known eruption of anything within Evindale. It's simply not geologically active in that sense. But if we take a look at this here, you'll notice that this is a mountain range that comes directly down out of the north, and with it this mighty river. Along this river, this life-giving river, and all of the rivers of the Slindari, all of these major rivers that you see here, some of which have been noted because some of which are noted by name because of their importance to the people who live near them. There are a wide variety of creatures, ancient magic users or wizards, alchemists, etc., have longed to come in here and study the creatures who inhabit these valleys. If we go all the way up to the north, we can see that this river here starts all the way up in here. Well, the Slin do use these rivers as major forms of transportation, coming straight past Skirix. And those who have attempted to come inland have found that there are also inhabitants within these waters that do prevent any kind of an entry unless you are Slin, or unless permission has been given. And so the Slin have gone from this former tyrannical government of the many types before, in their more feral state, where alphas had to exist over anyone else and had to subjugate anyone who would be prey beneath them. The Slin have since evolved. They have progressed into a different form of government, and in so doing has seemed to have gained many friends, believing in equality with nature, and hence you don't see a lot of clear-cutting within this in order to build any of their keeps. There is, instead, something else. Much of Syrinx itself is underground, as well as Kirasil, which is a name that some of you may know as a goddess within the world of Evindale. The curious thing about that is that there is, in fact, a temple right here to Kirasil. It is also said that Kirasil herself sometimes walks right up this river on the water itself and comes to rest within the home of Kirasil. Just as a reminder to those of you who have followed the world of Evindale in the past, the apostrophe IL is, that suffix means elf in Elvish. It actually means first people. And so Kiras itself, its meaning is actually somewhat lost in over time, but they believe it means wanderer or the wandering elf. In the rest of this, in the mountains themselves are also buried cities. Many of them, if you ever wanted to hold a campaign within the Slindari kingdom, you'd be able to do so easily by using this map, and you you can't place a kingdom anywhere in here. These mountains are wide. As I said before in the very beginning of this, the hexes themselves are 40 miles. This is huge as compared to our own world, where sometimes mountain ranges are a mere 15, 20 miles. These are 40 miles wide. And so don't be afraid to slam a whole bunch of cities all underground. For after all, they were the ones that found the original caves in the spine. They were the ones that inhabited the caverns, including Forngoth Cavern over in the spine, which I had discussed at another point. There are, within this, certainly underground cities as well. Cityx itself is simply known to be at the capital, at least governmentally. Any kind of an emissary from the Slindari Kingdom to a local government such as Nudriu or Kultrek, and certainly Amstrad and Mutvia. The Slindari government, or excuse me, they, speaking for the Slindari government, they have said many times that Syrinx is the capital. However, there have been a couple of occasions when emissaries or dignitaries from the Slindari government, they have been captured, tortured, etc. And this is how we know some of their information. And with that comes a new piece of information here. Syrinx is not necessarily the capital of the Slindari themselves, but the capital of the original people who used to live here, the dragon folk. There have been, on occasion, rumors of dragon folk that come out of this land. And for a very long time, people had believed that the dragon folk who lived here were the Slindari. It wasn't until, quite some time later that even the elves understood that the Slin were somewhere, but they didn't exactly know where. Many of them had just simply disappeared after they were kicked out of the spine by the dwarves. Well, the dragon folk that exist in this area seem to be the actual purveyors of that ancient magic that used to exist. I have told this story many times in other videos, so I apologize if you've heard it, but in no other video is it more proper to really speak about the story, the original first murder. Slindar itself means wielder of the coarse blade. It is a pejorative given to the Slin by other elves. Today, many believe that they should retain the name as a reminder of who they are, identified not only as outsiders and ostracized by other elves, but independent from any other elven nation. The Farseers of Sta Abri, or the Adriil of Delaran, even the Sadrathil of Dra Anan, or the Midadil of Mala. All of these elves do work with each other in some fashion. They do tend to travel the world, but infrequently do you see a Slindari outside of their kingdom. When you do, of course, it's always an odd thing. They're a little bit smaller. They don't look anything like any other elf, really, at least in terms of skin color, ranging anywhere from charcoal gray to like an ashen white, almost monochrome. Their hair always the color of a raven's wing, black with a blue or purple or green iridescence. Their eyes always the color of something underground, whether it be the metallics such as the ancient noble lineages, or the gem-colored eyes such as the blues and the reds, the yellows and the greens of the more recent generations of the Slindari, about the past 1,000 generations or so. All of this going back to their original history. However, some Slin have also come out. In particular, in a recent video, I went into the various heritages in a conversion to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, which happens to be my preferred game system, but I also want to convert this to D&D 5e. And of course, much of this has already been converted into Pathfinder 1st Ed. I had gone into the various heritages of the Slindari. I had only listed 4. There is a 5th one, and it is the one that is born of the dragon. The Slin themselves, that are half dragon and half Slin, or half elf, and they have powers which are reminiscent of what their ancestors, or what you would expect their ancestry to have. They do vary more in appearance than they do in power, but nonetheless, it's kind of interesting. However, it's not yet developed, and this is something that I'm dying to do, along with the rest of the races in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. But nonetheless, when it comes down to the Slindari, we are talking about people who are the wielders of magic. As I had said before, their name means the wielder of the coarse blade, in reference to the very first murder. When Cynthia created the physical beings of the world, all the mortals, the elves were there. However, death didn't yet exist. And so when all of the races had begun to, or rather now known as the ancestries, when all of the ancestries had started to overpopulate the world, I mean, hell, not even blades of grass were dying. Tempers were rising. You couldn't go to war because it achieved nothing. Nobody would die. I mean, people would get wounded, but not in the sense of wounding. You wouldn't even see bruising, which would be the death of at least a couple of cells. There was no such thing as death because Scythia was a goddess of life. Well, she had created an emissary to go out there, a consort, if you will, one by the name of Evindale. And in northern Mutvia, or what is today Mutvia, they met. Well, the Slin by this time had already been cast out of the spine and then found this nation. They had settled into it, and in particular, the mountain ranges here to the north. As a matter of fact, it was this mountain right here, they believe, this rusty-colored mountain, where the very first weapon was ever created. Thus, a mortal had become a god, for this was the very first creation. Of course, which came first, the chicken or the egg, or the tools to make the weapon, or the weapon to make the tools, so, or something. But they say that the weapon itself was the very first one. And the Slin, in going to meet, along with all the other ancestries, going to meet Evindale, wanted to see what this thing would do to a living being, such as Evindale. Well, it thrust it in there. Evindale died, and the rest of the magic that Evindale had within him, all of this divine magic of creation, leaked into the world, and that became the birth of arcane magic, as we know it today in these game systems. Well, the Slin remember magic from an earlier time, from before that time. So while the rest of the elves had said that they are now the wielders of the coarse blade, in reference to the blade that was used to kill Evindale, the Slin prefer to remember it as a time when that they are now the keepers of that ancient lore. And it could be because they had it, or it could be because the dragon folk that exist in this area had it, which is kind of an interesting thing. The dragon folk that exist within Slindari almost never leave this place. Of course, as a PC or what have you, I may end up creating that race in the future, and that would be a new addition to the world of Evindale, certainly, but it is not new in terms of NPCs. These dragon folk rarely leave, as I said, and when they do, it's never a sign of good. There was a time on the map of Mutvia, you'll see, it's way down here, or it's like down off the map in this area here. There's an empty valley that is now known as the Missing Mountain Plains. According to one legend, there was a human girl, about 12 years old or so, who had come out of this area, and in particular from this village here, Sedan Kor. Now, humans are not known to really live here, so how people knew that, or people guessed that she had come from Serentor, and being human, is kind of weird. But nonetheless, this human child somehow, some way, got into this area that used to have plenty of mountains within it. And carrying in her hand was a scroll. She read from the scroll, and immediately mountains disappeared. This would be the same kind of creation magic that Scythia used in order to create much of the physical world as we understand it to be today. Or certainly, it has the ability to shape entire ranges of mountains into nothing. Where that was used, or how it was used, or excuse me, where it is today, that scroll or that girl, no one knows. Of course, that was many, 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 many years ago, and being human, most likely she had died from old age or what have you. However, it was said by some of the locals of what is now known as the Missing Mountain Plains, that several dragon folk had come out of this area here, right out of southern Slindari, took her and brought her back. Who that was, we are not sure. There are many legends that it was the child of Vorain, the world's first adventurer, that some say. Others say it was that which I had referred to before, that child was actually Kidasil, the wanderer between the worlds, The one whose curiosity brings them out there, and anybody who wanders would be able to pray to this goddess and seek protection. So is it true that Kitasil, an actual deity, exists here? And is this temple actually her home? Well, for the Drosti of Mutvia, those who worship Kitasil as opposed to their patron deity, Nordaga, this is a very interesting point, and they would absolutely love to get in there. There are several family of Drosti from Mutvia who are very interested, in particular those that live in the eastern regions of Mutvia, who would like to come into this area. Well, unfortunately, because of the warfare that Amstrad has created in trying to come into this area, discover the magics that are used, the ancient magics, travel into it is exceedingly perilous. Therefore, I would say that the Slindari Empire is right around levels 15 through 20 if you are interested in holding it. However, many lower levels can come into this area. Red Town, by the way, the reason why it's known as Red Town as opposed to any of the other ancient, any of these other names of the Slin dialect of ancient Elven, is because of what happens there. The slaves who make their way all from all of the rest of Slindari, they all eventually make their way to Red Town or one other town up into the northwest, and I'll show that to you in a second, and from there into Cultrex City. Cultrex City, of course, as I had said elsewhere, does not actually dabble in trade within the city walls, but instead outside in the dark markets you can. And so out of Red Town, they will make their way over. Disobedient slaves are beaten mercilessly and flayed to the bone, hence Red Town, or red because of the blood. Coming up here to the northwest, here we see Roitik. Roitik is an interesting name because it is not Slin in origin, nor is Dakthin Gaul. Dakthin Gaul is dwarven in nature. So there's a little bit of an interest there from the dwarves, why it is that they would have a modern dwarven name there. It simply means river's entrance. But over here, Roitik is a name that comes from Nudfriu. This particular place is also the haven of slavers out of Slindari. Anybody, as a matter of fact, criminals, this Roitik is particularly known, any betrayers or traitors to the Slindari kingdom are traded out of Roitik and are sent west, sometimes into Amstrad. Any of the Slin that get traded into Amstrad are certainly going to be tortured in ways that are undefinable. This is the worst punishment. This is a punishment worse than death to a Slin, and that is to be handed over to the powers of Amstrad. There are 9 wizards that overlook the city-state of Amstrad, and in the Amstrad video we'll get into that a lot. And in particular, they have their own form of punishment, known as soul forging, where your soul is taken out of your body and you can be turned into a piece of furniture, like a table or an ottoman or what have you. And it is said that many Slindar are in fact the furniture pieces of Amstrad, all because they were sold out of Roitik. Dilix Tor is one of the very few trade cities that anybody would be able to access through this river. But as you can imagine, it's fairly well protected. But here in Haliaxgor Fell, this particular district here, not many of the secrets of the Slindar are here to be found. It is merely a river in a heavily forested region. The Slin do not occupy this area with any particular well, really, they don't occupy much of it. There's a very good reason for that. While the Slin have taken up residence on much of the surface and certainly beneath the land here, many of the creatures that I had spoken about before, these primordial ancient things, such as what would be the equivalent of dinosaurs, they live in this area, in this mountainous valley, this massive area that used to be a glacier valley that came sweeping down out of this area over the course of time and dug all of this out. If you come off of the river before you get to Dilix Tor, you're going to have to face whatever that is. So adventuring parties may find their entrance right here. There are a couple places that dot this, small little trading villages with eager people that would like to do something, but these are typically disassembled in a rather quick fashion. The Slindari government does not welcome strangers, but Dilix Tor, in this case, is a little bit of an oddity. The people of the Slindari Empire have all agreed that a place should exist in the event that they want to open up to them to the public later on. Some have taken advantage of this, however, and come into Dilix Tor, trade themselves in as slaves so that they could be taken. However, Dilix Tor is also a trap. Anybody that comes into Dilix Tor and is traded as a slave, their mind is no more. Several Amstradian wizards have come into this area, and magics that they could not fathom were used against them in order to prep them for whatever it is that they would become within the Slindari Kingdom. Dilix Tor, while it still stands, word has finally gotten out that over the past 20 years or so, Dilix Tor has been doing this kind of trading, and to be traded in as a slave there, while you will fetch a good price, no one really wants to go there. So this seems to be the equivalent of a penal colony for those on the outside, and the more extroverted, if you will, or the less what is the word for people who are xenophobic? The less xenophobic Slin kind of welcome strangers in this area. If you were to branch off into any of these other areas, you would have to cross these mountains before you were to get anywhere in here, unless, of course, you went down south, at which point you would have to encounter all of the creatures that come into this area. This may be considered an adventurer's paradise. It is fraught with danger and fraught with mystery. Certainly rogues and have tried to practice stealth in this area. However, they found out that not only is it the animals and the beasts that exist in this area, but much of the magical beasts from ancient times also exist here. Within this region, you will find hippogriffs and griffins, many of them in their ancient primordial form, while the current ones, or the ones that we typically think of in the various bestiaries that we'll see as in the games, those would be considered the more contemporary ones or the more modern ones. Those you would find in Delaran. However, this isn't the only similarity between Delaran and Slindari. I know I'm bouncing around all over the place. I apologize for that. But there are several things that are reminiscent. Not only is the Slin dialect very, very close to ancient Elven, while Elven itself has changed due to interactions with the rest of the world. It's not only the language that is similar, but also the buildings themselves. The architecture is still very reminiscent of what you would find in Delaran. And this is something that the Slin have prided themselves on. When asked about it, as compared to holding on to a pejorative as their name, they say, well, we are elves, and maybe the rest of the world should really remember that, and then begin to treat them fairly. So I come back to Dilix Tor again. Dilix Tor is one of the few areas where the ancient magics are in use to wipe the minds of any slaves that come into this area, much to the chagrin of any would-be spies. This is one of the few times that any outsider will ever see the true underlying magics of the Slin Empire. It's just with a small touch. Some have seen a small material of some sort. It tends to look like a crystal, but they've not. One person in the writing has seen it as something a little bit more than that, as more of a shiny piece of bone rather than a crystal, geometric in shape. So it was definitely a shaped piece of something, but it was opaque. It was not translucent. Holding on to that, they were able to touch the forehead of the would-be slave, and mind was wiped. They would then undergo a re-education process, and then what purpose they serve within the Slindari Kingdom beyond that, considering that the Slindari do not dabble in slaves, no one knows. But one theory is that they're used as vivisections in human experiments, which is possibly even worse than slavery. Depends on who you ask. The rest of the Slindari Kingdom, I'm going to turn to your questions in a second here. You are looking at areas. I'm going to go over the individual districts here. Here in the southern district, known as Exaros Gorthon, this area right here, this is the area that most will first encounter when they come from the south or from Kultrek. Coming into this area, you will find Slantal, Red Town, Serencourt, Kiril Tiril, and Klin, as well as on the western side, Stil Yilix. Stil Yilix is more of a combative state. The Amstradian wizards will send witches in training down into Mutvia, particularly this northeastern corner here, and come into this area. Well, at least they used to before Stil Yilix was done. The reason for that is that if a witch was able to exist in this area, and would be over here or over here, that they would come in. If they were able to exist, then they would be able to continue their training in these in the witchly arts, and then be able to go back into Amstrad. So needless to say, you're not sitting out level 1s or anything like that. You're sitting out like level 10s, level 11s, and see if they can at least survive on the shores. The witches were also used for their arcane powers, sending out familiars that many witches had, at least in Pathfinder First Edition. I don't yet know what they're going to do for witches or slayers or what have you, or any of those other base classes that came out of First Ed. I don't know what they can do with them in the Second Ed. Hopefully they will include them, or at least some variation of them. But witches tend to have familiars, and it's because of that they would then send those familiars in. Unfortunately, this is one of the ways that they found out that the Ents and the Slin have a kind of an agreement, because many of those familiars would not come back, or they would come back wounded severely because of the treants and the beasts that the Slin have here, have an agreement with. So while the South is more well known to the rest of the world, it's more easily accessible, the North is also known, because if you ever wanted to come out of Nudvriu, there's the capital of Nudvriu is over here somewhere. If you ever wanted to travel to the west from Nudvriu, you would do so by coming around here and eventually stopping off at Daxgaltir. Daxgaltir, just due to its remote location from the rest of the Slindari Kingdom, is actually a trading post and a boat repair stop. This would be akin to, let's say, what Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland in Canada. They believe that the Viking settlement there in the northern tip of Newfoundland was a boat repair station, because the Vikings, of course, come from Scandinavia. They traveled 3 months over the northern Atlantic Sea to get over here. And that's the same kind of theory here, is that Daxgaltir serves as a boat repair station. Not so much trading is done here, at least on an official level. If there was ever a black market, I suppose it could exist in Daxgaltir. Dac-Thirngol, on the other hand, you'll notice that the Dac here, this all means essentially a river's entrance, or like an estuary. Dac-Thirngol, its origins seem to be dwarven. This could hail from a time when the dwarves tried to chase down Slin. I'm actually uncertain of it. I have a couple of different stories in my head as to what this is. There is actually a small building right here, and it is currently a slave town. So in the very least, you can continue to trade it as such. But it is there is some dwarven influence. Even the architecture is a little bit dwarven. So there's some theories there. Which came first then? Was it the dwarves? Did they exist in this area first? Are there other secrets of the dwarves in the Slindari Kingdom that the Slin are hiding? Do the dwarves even know about their own history, or was it wiped from all of their minds at some point in the past? How did the dwarves truly come into this? I've let it slip during the main Evindale video that the dwarves are actually descendants from some of the very first elves. And of course, no dwarf worth its salt would ever admit to that. They say that they've always been their kind, and never were they an elf. Well, this kind of lends to a slightly different theory. Perhaps the dwarves came from here first, and something happened that caused them to go down to the east into the spine, which would actually be very easy. While it's not here on this map, from Dac-Thirngol, if you follow the coastline, you come into Nudvriu and you continue east, you will eventually hit what some consider to be the northern reaches of the spine. From there, you can go south. When I go over the Nudvriu video, you will be shown some of the mountains where ancient dwarven artifacts may still be found. That's a great adventuring region if you were ever looking for ancient artifacts. And I do mean artifacts, artifacts as in relics, as in like world power type of things. In another video, I'll get into the stories behind the Calgary Helix and other things like that, but there's a rumor there that one of these first primordial stones of physical reality exists still there in the mountains to the east. Coming into Daxkeltir, does the Dak, also a dwarven name meaning estuary, does that really, is it true? This is now two places that have that ancient dwarven word in it. But Skiltir is absolutely a Slindari name. So there's a couple of theories that could go on there, and if you enjoy playing dwarven characters, particularly those with a political bent, or you enjoy that elven dwarven animosity made famous by Tolkien, certainly these are reasons for it. If you happen to play a dwarven historian, maybe your GM would like to take you on a story about that conflict, and perhaps in your later years as an adventurer, or in the later years of your character, meaning higher levels, you'll be able to come into this area and investigate by heading inland. And maybe it is here within these mountains then that you'll be able to find some other pieces of dwarven history that have since been lost. If we come down to, let's see here, Philcorin. Philcorin is an interesting inland town, much like the one up above, which is, was it Deluxtor? Deluxtor. Philcorin is also inland at the end of a river. However, it is not a slave town. This is one of the very few places on the map that's a slave town, aside from the one all the way up to the north. Philcorin dabbles in trade to some degree with the outside world, but this is mainly a destination for the Slin. This would be kind of a hub of trade in southern Slindari. So they do know, or at least the outside world knows, that boats will come into this area. Slin boats will come in, go upriver, and come into one of these, one of the rivulets, small rivers. I'm horrible with geography. They will come up one of these rivers and into Philcorin. Where exactly it is, not too many outsiders do know, but we do know it is somewhere in Exvas Gorthon at the head of that river. These larches are all up in hills. They believe that Philcorin is there, and from there, trade routes to the rest of the Slindari kingdom will exist, which leads people to believe that there are multiple places like that. Kidasil is also theorized to be one of those such places, being able to sail upriver. There are a couple of other places here on the map that you can place. Certainly, if you wanted to explore that, you'd be able to have inland villages. Perhaps there is an ancient secret power that exists within the mountains here, of some kind of a peace that exists between the ancient dwarves that not even the modern dwarves know about. Maybe the dragon folk, which I will definitely cover and convert. Now, the more I think about it, the more I'm getting excited about that for Pathfinder 2nd Ed as Dragonfolk conversion. Maybe there is a place up here in these thick hills and in these steep mountains and these old crags. These mountains, by the way, would be akin to the plateau mountains that you would see in New Zealand. Ancient mountains that have had their valleys carved out by eons of rivers going through them. Maybe the three people, the ancient Slin and ancient dwarves and dragon folk, maybe they all combine into this area. Or maybe this is a forgotten place of some eldritch lore that no one has seen for thousands and thousands of years. Maybe underneath each of the lakes that exist in these areas hold deep secrets down within. And if you had wanted to go underground, maybe you'll find an underground passage that can lead you to one of the holds, the ancient holds of the Slindari there in the Underearth. If you had wanted to find out more about Slindari, I'm going to certainly release some additional information about it in an upcoming atlas. Everything that I'm doing in these videos will make it into an atlas. So much less improved. So what I'm trying to do is tell you 35 years of stuff. And there are languages that I want to fill out. There's lore. artifacts, ancestries, beasties, and all sorts of things that I would like to be able to give you folk. If you guys are interested in holding a campaign in Slindari, I would love to know about it. I'd like to know what your interpretation of it is. I want to find out. It's one of my friends, Howie, ran a campaign in Evindale, and one of the first things he said was, I want to run it. Do you have any notes or anything like that? I said, yeah, I have one under one condition. And I think I told everyone this once before, but he said, oh, what, that, don't change anything? I was like, no, by all means, make it yours. I just want to play in it. So if you happen to be local to the Southern New York area and you want to run a game in the Slindari country, let me know. I want to play in it. So that's going to be it. I'm going to turn to your questions now on Facebook, and let's see if there's any. There's no questions. If anybody has any questions, I'd be very interested in finding out what they are. But other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this video. I know it's a lot shorter than some of the other ones. I'm still working on this particular piece. As I said in the very beginning of the video, there's not, I haven't really developed it too much, but you guys voted for it, and I definitely want to touch on it. If there's more that you want to do, or would like to know about this, I certainly do not mind doing a second part of this that will answer all your questions. But in the meantime, I hope you guys like this, and we'll see you next time on Evindale.